This is the 2022 Kia Stinger. It's a rear-wheel drive sports sedan that made people stop and think, wow, so that's what a Kia can do. At least that's the effect it had when it came out in 2017. And now in 2022, it's fighting for its life. So we're gonna see how it's held up. The Stinger has always been a bit of a special car for me, and for Paolo too. So, of course, the week that Kia sends us a Stinger, he's on a 3-week vacation out in South Africa, but I do want to say a huge congratulations to him and his girlfriend, now fiance, for getting engaged. Very cool, very supportive, love you guys. But what we're going to do today is figure out how much he's missing out on. The Stinger that we have this week is an interesting spec for a press car, and even a more interesting spec for Wisconsin. It's a rear-wheel drive GT-Line with a 2.5-liter turbo, and it makes 300 horsepower and 311 pound-feet. And those power figures for the 2.5 here, those are improved from the original 2-liter that this thing debuted with, and the power figures are reasonably good, but I can't help but feel like if you really want the true Stinger experience, the real sports sedan experience from Kia, you need the 3.3 twin-turbo V6. It ups your power to 368, which is hardly more than 50 more horsepower, but you do get a lot of that drama. Now here with this 2.5, you still get a reasonably strong engine, but it's kind of all reliant on the turbo. You put your foot down and you have a little bit of time. When you're in sport mode, it'll keep you in a lower gear to keep the turbo spooled more, but there is a minute. You put your foot down, then torque is delivered. Turbo, turbo, torque, 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 and you do get a genuine feeling of, oh man, this is pretty quick, but then you get about 4,500 RPM, 5,000 approaching your red line and higher in the rev band, and balls just kind of seem to fall off a little bit. And you guys know me well enough by now to know that I'm not one to preach about horsepower, but I really do think to get the full Stinger experience with the max power, you need the V6. And that's largely because this thing isn't light. It's over 3,800 pounds. So more power, a little bit more torque would be nice. But like we said, power isn't everything, and power delivery is a big part of a performance-oriented car. This has an 8-speed automatic transmission, and I guess I'll say it this way. The K5 GT in Kia's lineup comes with a dual clutch transmission. All of the Hyundai N cars can come with that wet dual clutch transmission, which is fantastic. It's immediate. It has a sense of occasion. There's some theater to it. It's just got a little bit more fizz to it. And this 8-speed, it's smooth, but it just lacks some of that theater. And speaking of theater, you get downshift a couple. Not really much in the exhaust note. It's not to say that it's got a bad tone, it's just kind of quiet. But then from there, how is the power getting to the pavement? This is such an interesting spec to me because I'll peel back the onion a little bit for you guys. We get our cars out of Chicago. Press cars generally come loaded up, top trims, biggest engines, all-wheel drive. And especially being in the Midwest, being in Wisconsin, I'm filming this on March 9th. Generally, they put away the rear-wheel drive performance cars for the winter. They lock them up because people have a tendency to bin them if you don't. This, maybe it's because it has a little bit less horsepower, but they sent us a rear-wheel drive. Yeah, so power goes through the 2.5-liter turbocharged engine, through the 8-speed, albeit a little bit dull transmission, and to the rear wheels through an open diff, which means you get in a corner, put your foot down a little bit, and you can get it to step out a bit. Now, this is nice because you can hoon around a little bit and have some fun with this thing. However, if you're going to be taking this to an autocross event or anything on the track where timing is involved, you're going to lose grip, you're going to lose power and torque, so you will suffer on lap time. Now, this being the GT-Line, I'm assuming if you're going to an autocross event, you're probably getting the 3.3 GT1 or 2 package. However, with that being said, it is fun to do skids in this thing. Here we come to a corner, heading down the gearbox, down into second, pitch it in, on throttle, there you go. Now, you can option all-wheel drive with this thing. It'll be a rear bias all-wheel drive system, and it's pretty good. It's only $2,200, and that's across the trim. So what I would probably do, especially if I'm into autocrossing or racing, I would get maybe a rear-wheel drive 3.3 GT1 or 2 package. Now, if you're not the sliding type, or you somehow manage to live in a place that gets worse weather than Wisconsin, you can option rear-biased all-wheel drive to any Stinger trim for $2,200. Which isn't a bad deal, considering when you add all-wheel drive, Kia throws in a heated steering wheel. Now, I know I've kind of been dumping on this thing for not having the power of the V6, and I'm really not trying to suggest that this is incredibly underpowered or you have to move up to the V6. You really don't. This thing is actually a huge improvement from when the car originally came out. It came out with 2-liter, and now this 2.5 is up like over 50 horsepower on the original motor. You still have over 300 horsepower, you have 311 pound-feet of torque, and your 0 to 60 is still under 6 seconds, so it is properly quick. Ultimately, behind the wheel, it's still a sports sedan, and it feels that way. The power delivery has some theater to it when the turbo kicks in. Your steering, especially in a corner, it loads up the front end pretty well. It could use a little bit more aggressive tires, but you have decent feedback. Your brakes, while they're not the big Brembos, have decent and confident stopping power. And in a corner, the chassis is nice and composed. We'll pitch it in here. Front end, good grip. You can play with the back, with the throttle a little bit. It has a great balance to it. The back end steps out really progressively. It's not scary at all. It's really predictable. And the chassis is really well balanced. And this thing is on static dampers. You don't have adjustable dampers, and it's totally fine because it strikes that balance really, really well of keeping the nice rigid chassis composed in a corner, but also being soft enough and compliant enough where on side streets you still have a fairly luxurious, refined and quiet ride. It does the luxury thing almost as well as it does the sports sedan thing. So with that, let's step outside. Now, I've loved the design of this thing ever since it came out 5 years ago. It looks low, it looks wide, it looks aggressive, it absolutely looks the part. You've got this long hood and it looks spectacular in this ascot green color, and it's accented by, and of course, Paolo would love this, there's no actual chrome, but there's like dark chrome or black chrome or whatever you want to call it, but it's perfectly outlining the faux hood scoops up here. Those are a familiar face from 5 years ago, but up here you have the brand new Kia logo, and you still have black chromed out tiger nose grille. It's still very Kia, it's still very Stinger. Down here you have a revised front fascia with, again, dark chrome accents, and then not quite so functional front air inlets and air curtains. The interesting thing here is also you have completely new and revised headlight units. These are full LEDs, and the GT2 trim I think has a different style projector, but they're all LEDs, and they have a really aggressive kind of like almost Porsche-esque design to them. I really like the LED indicators that are up here. And then moving around to the side, you can see the GT-Line specific wheels. They're 18 inches, which adds a little bit more sidewall, but to be honest, that's kind of what you want if you are going to be driving this thing more aggressively. The wheels themselves look absolutely fantastic, and they look a lot better than the Flower Power wheels that this thing came out with a couple years ago. Now, of course, down here you still have a gill, which might actually, yep, it is actually functional. So this will pull air out from behind your wheel, make it a little bit more aerodynamic, and possibly even cool your brakes. Once you get to the profile though, you see how absolutely long this thing is. It's a bit longer than like a 3 Series or a C-Class or an A4, but it's not quite the same size as something like a 5 Series. So it's got a nice little in-between thing, almost like a Cadillac CT5. Around this back angle, this back 3/4 with the sloped roof for the hatch, you get real A7 vibes. I've even, while I was shooting B-roll, got a little bit of a Panamera vibe back here. It looks fantastic. And then around back, you have these interesting reflectors here on your rear panel, but then the LED taillight, they fixed it. It didn't used to go all the way across, and now it illuminates all the way across like it should. It says Stinger on the back, GT-Line badge, quad exhaust. They're kind of real. But then of course, the big reason that you buy something like this, like an A7, like a 4 Series Grand Coupe, you've got the hatch, and you have a huge, huge cargo area back here. And speaking of that, let's jump inside. Okay, so up until this point, you may have been fooled into thinking that this rivals something like a baby Audi or BMW or Mercedes or something of the more luxury influence, but on the interior it becomes a little bit more apparent as to where you're saving your money. The design is handsome, it's tasteful, but it's not exactly what I might call inspiring. Some of the materials in here are really nice. You've got a nice leather wrapped steering wheel, it's got a flat bottom, the leather on the seats is really good, but then you have other things. You've got kind of like it is soft touch, but the dash is a little bit interesting to touch. The piano black around your center console is not ideal and it will get fingerprints everywhere, but that's kind of the extent of it. It's a lot of typical Hyundai Kia plastics and aluminums and that sort of thing. It's not inherently slapping you in the face that it's not quite luxury, but there are little nuances here or there that you can pick up on if you're spending more time in this thing. Now, right next to your right knee, you've got this Donkey Kong barrel style shifter, which is hilarious and has been here since the car came out. Your drive mode selector is below it, and it's a tiny little dial. I keep mistaking it for a volume control because I drive a Mazda, and the volume is down here on the center console, but that's how you adjust your drive mode. You have 5 different modes that you can choose from. Up in your gauge cluster, you have a semi-digital cluster, and again, this is kind of where it reminds you that this is the base trim, the GT line. You have a semi-digital cluster. There's not inherently anything wrong with it, but it doesn't use the real estate to the fullest that it could. However, when you jump over to your center screen, this is a totally new design. It's a new unit, it's running new software, and it's fantastic. It's very similar software to what we just tested in the Carnival, and it's great. All of the Hyundai systems that we've also tested, very similar, very good. You've got Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, they're wired, but they're still very good. It's responsive, you get your sounds of nature, and all of that stuff that you could possibly want. Down here you do have heated seats, but they're the weird rocker panels that only go backward, and you don't have cooled seats. Again, little nuances that tell you, okay, yep, we're still in the base, it's okay. The seats themselves are actually pretty comfortable. We talked about the leather being really nice, and the seats themselves are comfortable. You can adjust your lumbar and stuff like that, but the actual seating position seems just a hair off to me. I feel like I'm sitting a little bit too high, and when I try to drop it down, this is the lowest that I can go, and when I'm wearing my hat, I hit my head, the little knob at the top of the hat, on the grab handle up here. So that's not perfect. And it doesn't, I'm not sitting too far up, I'm not sitting too far back and losing height that way. It's just, it sits a little bit tall. And then as I'm hitting my noggin on this thing over here, I'm looking up and seeing, oh, maybe I can get a little bit more real estate with the sunroof shade open. And you can, but then you're looking at the fact that you don't have a big pano roof. So, in the back seat now, I'm 6'1", I'm sitting behind myself. This is where I would have the seat to be comfortable. I still have 3-ish inches of knee room, which is pretty dang good. You've got mat pockets back here. They're a woven pattern, and you do have air conditioning and heating vents back here. You've also got a 12-volt socket as well as a USB. This is where the Stinger makes its value proposition over something like a more upmarket G70. You can actually fit a human over 6 feet back here. Now in terms of headroom, this is where you sacrifice because you do have the sloped back. You do have the kind of like sporty A7 shape to it, and there is a little bit of headroom cut out, but you still kind of compromise a little bit in terms of headroom. This is the price that you pay for beauty. Ultimately though, it's pretty nice. And with the trunk being a hatch, you have a huge amount of space. It's very practical. I just would like to be an inch or two shorter in this thing. But with that, let's get into the final thoughts. So there it is, the 2022 Kia Stinger. Sorry to Paolo again that you didn't get to drive it, but congrats again for your engagement. And what some of you may not know is Paolo recently bought a Genesis G70 with the 3.3 liter twin turbo V6 and all-wheel drive. So expect that comparison video coming very soon. For this rear-wheel drive 2.5 GT line though, I think it strikes a phenomenal balance of performance, fun, style, practicality, and features, especially considering, as tested, this thing is under $40,000. The GT line may be the base trim, but it certainly doesn't feel that way. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.